1469, Newgate Prison, London. Behind the bars sits a noble knight, a veteran of the 100 Years' War, and a respected member of Parliament. And at the very same time, a hardened robber, a plunderer of monasteries, and a rapist who took another man's wife. Right here, in a solitary cell in Newgate, this criminal forged the legend of knightly honor and nobility that we still believe today. It's one thing to read a dry list of crimes, it's another to watch this aristocrat's methods in action. Winter 1450. 26 well-armed men lie in ambush on a country road, waiting for the Duke of Buckingham. This was no robbery. Buckingham was one of the most powerful men in the kingdom, and our knight was planning a political assassination. Only luck saved the Duke. At the last moment he changed his route, and the plot fell apart. From there it only escalates. For 18 months he held the whole county in fear, extorting his neighbors, driving off their cattle, and between the robberies, worse was going on. In May, the knight rapes Joan, the wife of Hugh Smith.
Don't be afraid, darling.
A few months later, he comes back and takes her by force again. But the most brazen act was still to come. The authorities' patience finally ran out. The same Buckingham he'd failed to kill had him seized and locked up at Coleshill Manor. 2 days later, the knight climbed out of a window, swam the moat in the dark, and was free. Only instead of lying low, the very next day he gathered his gang and led them against the Cistercian Abbey of Combe. That night the raiders broke down the doors of the house of God, forced their way in, terrorized the monks, and carried off everything of value: the treasury, the church plate, the silver. But it wasn't enough for the knight. The next night he came back for what he'd missed.
I have taken your silver.
The indictment records that during the second raid he personally beat the abbot bloody with a club. And through all of it he kept slipping the noose. Arrested, he escaped. Caught again, jailed again. In the chaos of the gathering Wars of the Roses, he switched sides without a shred of principle, drifting between royal favor and disgrace, but the gallows never once touched him. Blood too good, too useful a tool for whoever held power at the time. For years, his punishment amounted to a comfortable move from one cell to the next. He was a monster the system refused to hang, keeping him on a leash instead. Let's leave our prisoner in his cell and ask a naive question. That knight in shining armor, the one who keeps his word, spares his enemy, protects the weak, did he ever actually live? In what country? In what century? Let's take the absolute gold standard of the age, Godfrey of Bouillon, one of the 9 worthies, the model soldier of Christ. He was one of the leaders of the First Crusade. He took Jerusalem, and when they offered him the crown, he refused it with the deepest humility. I will not wear a crown of gold where the Savior wore a crown of thorns. Faith, nobility, courage. Here he is, the flawless ideal in the flesh. Or so it seems. Except Jerusalem was taken at the cost of 3 days of slaughter. They killed everyone, without exception. Muslims, Jews, women, children. By the chronicler's accounts, the blood in the streets ran knee-deep. Godfrey himself took no part in the butchery. While his men were putting the city to the sword, he stripped off his armor and walked barefoot to pray at the Holy Sepulchre. Call it an alibi of sorts. But here's the thing. This is the best of them. The acknowledged canonical ideal of the age. If that's on the Paragon's record, what were the ones nobody wrote legends about doing? So there's your answer to that uncomfortable question. The flawless knight in shining armor never existed. No such men ever walked this earth. The only place you could meet them, then and now, is on the pages of chivalric romance. And the book that every knight in shining armor grew out of was written right here, in that same solitary cell in Newgate, by our hero prisoner, Sir Thomas Malory, Le Morte d'Arthur. Yes, that King Arthur. The Round Table, Lancelot, Galahad, the sword in the stone, the quest for the Grail. Everything we know about chivalry came out of this. It was Malory who gathered the scattered legends into a single body of work and created the canon of the Arthurian myth. The man who gave the world the absolute ideal of honor was himself infinitely far from it. He wrote his masterpiece behind bars, signing off at the end as a knight prisoner and adding a prayer for his release. While the noblest hero on earth was taking shape on the page, the man who wrote him was begging for one thing only: to be let out of prison. So who was Sir Thomas Malory, really? At first, a perfectly respectable member of his class, a hereditary knight, a veteran of the war in France, who fought under the banner of the Earl of Warwick at the siege of Calais. After the war, a respected member of Parliament for Warwickshire, a name, status, an excellent reputation. But by 1450 it all collapsed. The whole criminal record began. The ambush, the extortion, the plundered abbey, Joan Smith. And after that, 20 years in and out of prison, 8 arrests and 2 daring escapes. He couldn't be tamed. And here's a fact that says more about him than any verdict. Whenever the Crown declared a general pardon, Malory was written out of it, by name, 4 times running. This pardon shall not extend to Thomas Malory, knight. The king singled him out in a line of his own. This one, no mercy. That's the man who, with that record, sitting in a cell between sentences, wrote the definitive romance of knightly honor. And his prayer for release, as it happens, was answered. In 1470 he was finally let out. He got about 5 months of freedom and died. That said, let's be fair. One charge on that list is still disputed by historians to this day: the Joan Smith case. In medieval law, the term raptus meant not only rape, but abduction. And that charge was often pinned on nothing more than a married woman running off with a lover. Given the number of powerful enemies Malory had, the accusation could simply have been invented to pad out the list of his sins. And I'll say this much. Take that one charge off the list, and I stop seeing an out-and-out monster in Thomas Malory. What I see is a desperate chancer, a gambler who, in the chaos of the gathering Wars of the Roses, staked everything, took on the system, and lost badly. That still leaves the abbey, plundered twice over. Though who knows, perhaps the sight of a rich monastery simply woke the good old Viking blood in Sir Thomas's veins. But joking aside, the ambush on the Duke, the extortion, and the abbot, clubbed bloody in his own church, haven't gone anywhere. Say what you like, this knight of the road stays a criminal. It's just that on one count of the indictment, 500 years later, he's found himself some lawyers. And now, what became of our convict's manuscript? 15 years after Malory's death, the text fell into the hands of William Caxton, the man who had just set up the first printing press in England. Le Morte d'Arthur became one of the first printed books in the country's history. Caxton carefully edited the manuscript, divided it into chapters, gave it that very title, and ran off the first print run. And for 4 centuries after, that book stayed the gold standard of knighthood. In the Victorian era, when England was gripped by an obsession with the Middle Ages, everything grew out of Malory's text. The great poems of Tennyson, the canvases of the pre-Raphaelites, the whole cult of the noble gentleman. And from there, it was a straight road into the 20th century. The sword in the stone, the golden age of Hollywood, and half the world's fantasy. Absolutely every noble knight we admire, from King Arthur on screen to the heroes of today's blockbusters, traces his bloodline back to a single book. A book written in a prison cell by a criminal the king personally refused to pardon 4 times over. So there's the whole truth about knightly honor. It wasn't dreamed up by a saint or by some flawless hero. It was made by a criminal, in a cold cell, killing time between sentences. And the most astonishing part is that this truth has been sitting in open archives for ages, in dry court records. Yet we go on opening Le Morte d'Arthur and marveling at the valor of its heroes. Once again, the beautiful myth turned out to be stronger than the facts. The legend easily outlived its filthy underside, and every one of its author's sins shrank into the fine print of footnotes nobody reads. So the next time shining armour flashes across your screen, remember exactly whose pen gave it to the world. And down in the comments, tell me, what's your favourite beautiful myth with a monster behind it, once you scratch the surface?